Hi everyone. I am Anubhav, and thanks Dan for introducing me. So today, thank you first of all, APIsec University for giving me this opportunity where I can talk about the API security, how we handle API security in banking and fintech, and what are the important roles API plays in banking and fintech. So I'll start with just giving you the some agenda. So I have divided this whole presentation in four parts. Maybe I'll discuss first in the phase one. We will most discussing about the understanding the space of the API way, like what are in this space banking and fintech, what we are talking about. So we'll discuss the what is the overall space in banking and fintech, what are the evolution of APIs happen from the legacy system to the APIs now, and in the next phase we will discuss about the why actually we are discussing the security of API specifically in fintech and banking, or the why the conference is that as the conference is API money. So why we are focusing so much on the need of security in the API in the banking sector. Then in the next phase, I'll talk about some challenges, attacks which recently happen on maybe case studies recently happen on the API related attacks in fintech and banks. And in phase four, we mostly discuss about the common best practices, how we can apply security, all on those topics. So, having said that, let's start with a little bit about me. I just want to introduce me. Hi, I am Anubhav Sharma. I have around 9.5 years experience in application and product security. I started my career along 10 years back, and I worked on multiple companies and helped those companies to enhancing the security. And as well as I worked on Digital, Synopsys, Rakuten, Swiggy, Amazon, and currently I'm working in cash-free payments. In this whole journey, I worked on different domains in application security. Where first you can say API or application security. I have worked on source code reviews. I have worked on secure design reviews. I have worked on security automations, including CI/CD, DevSecOps tools, and also I have worked on the cloud security part. Then a couple of achievements I got during this my journey. That one, I have close to around found 1,000 security issues overall in this career. And then I am also doing some part-time bug bounty hunting. I do some mentorship, speaking the conferences and all. And recently, which is again a great achievement for me, that I have discovered this CB to 2024 42506, which is broken access control. It was in retool API. We'll discuss about it more. And I've done some podcast, and you can connect me on LinkedIn here. So that's about me, and let's start our presentation now. So as I mentioned, we will discuss in the phase that what is the actual space in the banking and fintech, and we will focus on the how the role of the APIs in this particular space. Okay. So first of all, for that we have to understand that what is APIs in banking and fintech. So if I talk about APIs, so normal definition of the APIs, everyone knows this application programming interface, where we know that that particular API is playing a role of connecting or as a catalyst when there is a program or there is a service needs to be connected. For example, I want some service, I call a API and I get the response and I get the resource in the response of that APIs. So that's the normal definition of the API. But in banking sector, what we can say is this application programming interface, it basically acting as a core of that digital transformation which we are seeing now. For example, you can now pay through your phone, you can digitally access your bank accounts, everything you can do now. That core, that backend behind that is the APIs. So API is what, whenever you click on any kind of payment or any kind of, let's say I want to see my account details. So that as soon as I click on that event, generates and tells that, okay, this particular user requesting this resource, and that there's API call happen, and then API will generate the response from that resource server. So similarly in banking, that's why it's a very crucial role, because every transaction, every account creation, every account update, everything is running around the APIs. Then why we are using these APIs? Because everyone knows that APIs allow seamless communication between different systems. We can easily communicate. We can enable service in real time. We don't have to wait too much. And the real time payments we can do using APIs, because it's a small program which API use leveraging the microservices. then we can only the process will be more fast on that. And then we can do account management, even integration, all those things. Even now, what why we are evaluating so much that we can actually integrate other APIs into our system. So that's the benefit of APIs, because it's easy to integrate. uh, and especially in fintech, APIs are enable companies to innovate quickly while leveraging banking infrastructure without being bound to traditional banking models. So, if you are already aware about that fintech model, or this fintechs or banking sector is growing day by day. Why? Which is the reason that we are able to do is because there is a concept of open banking and banking as a service, which we call PaaS. So, in because of that service enablement, because of the APIs, this service enablement will be happen. And that's how the companies are running on the APIs. The companies are running the banking services, fintech services. The companies are non-banking; they are non-actual bank, but they are functioning as a bank. The reason behind that is the APIs. So, as the code says, that APIs enable banks and fintechs to deliver faster, more efficient, and more personalized service by allowing data to flow between systems securely. So, this is the core definition of banking in APIs. Now, I just want to discuss about the models and the API banking. So API banking, as I mentioned, it's an online connection which have third party can establish with bank to get limited access to the bank's core system. So take an example. Let's say I there is a company who want to integrate some services, and they want to give a user the functionality to access their account details. But instead of using the direct bank, what we are doing, that business is providing a API functionality, where as soon as you click on that, I want my account details, the particular business API will call the bank API. And because they have a like integration with the bank, so they can easily fetch your information, which we call the open banking, where we user provide a consent that, okay, I want to share my information, and then the particular business will able to get that information. And that's how the overall API banking model works. Then, apart from that, the third parties also can be used the APIs to pull data or offer bank services. Like if you see, there are so many applications are providing credit card, providing banking services. All this happens because of the API. And there are a couple of models working on not only the open banking. There are other models also work on the API banking models, where open banking, as I mentioned, the core model, which is again banking as a service, the again the second core model. Then there's a platform banking, there is a embedded payments, there is a decentralized finance APIs, then there is a data as a service. But apart from that, the core functionality run behind the open banking, banking as a service, and the platform banking. All three are different terminologies, but they are interconnected with somehow, because the concept starts with the open banking, and that's how the open banking is a framework where using that framework, banking as a service started, and platform banking started. So all these things are the differentiated model in the API banking. Uh, let's move on to next one. We already discussed about the models of the API, but in actual environment, when we start using APIs for banking, there are three types of those APIs. One is the private API, second is the partner API, and third is the open API. So private APIs, you think about that APIs which is mostly within reside in the company itself. For example, a company I have a company where I am just talking that my internal services are talking to each other, and the whole transaction and all payment services are talking to each other inside the organization. And for that, I'm using private or internal APIs. So this is used within the enterprise. And what it will do, because if APIs enhances the efficiency and security, so that's why we use private APIs. And because these APIs are meant to be internal, they are not exposed outside on the edge layer services. That's why we use this private APIs. The second factor is the partner APIs. When we say partner APIs, is basically it's an agreement kind of APIs, where we use these APIs when we have a basic partnership with any kind of bank or some other entity, where we exchange this financial information, but we have a dedicated model signed with them, or we have a dedicated regulatories or requirements signed with them, that okay, we will use these APIs and we are authorized to use these APIs. So there is a authentication or authorization mechanism will happen. And there is a third type of API which model where we say that open API. This open APIs, it's a public APIs, it's already shared APIs. It enables the third party provider to use those API. Developers can use these APIs to build their platform, to integrate their platform, all these things. So let's discuss about why, as I mentioned, why we are discussing the specific topic where we are saying that why we need security, specifically in API, in banking and fintech sector. So for understand that, we have to first understand the attack surface of that. And for understanding the attack surface, we have to understand how big is the basically this environment, or how this evolution happened from the legacy system to the API banking. So if you see here, the use of application program interface in banking and fintech has been keep growing. There's a data shared in the Statista that says that 795 million API calls using banking APIs, which is increased over 1.5 billion. The data is recent July, August 24 data. So within a month, 1.5 billion open banking API calls happen. And then this shows that how much we are relies on the APIs in banking and fintech sector, because everything what we are doing, what we are digitally transforming the data, accessing the data, providing the data, all the CRUD request, everything is using API only. Then there is one more statistics which says that the number of open banking API calls will increase from 102 billion in 2023 to 580 billion in 2027. And this shows like around 12% compared to this is increase in 12%. The graph also shows that how much year by year increasing in the particular fintech market size, as well as the this API calls which are happening on every month or every year. The total revenue of the worldwide fintech market is expected to around 566 billion dollar in 2030, which is again showing the. So why are we are discussing this data? It's not like I understand this is mostly on the purpose of the securing the API side, but when an attacker thinks about that, and when we know about that, that I want to do a attack system which, so there should be a reward for an attacker. So these are kind of things when attacker point of view, I can understand, okay, this much the evolution of API happen, and this is the bigger target for me. And plus, because the transaction and financial data include in this, so this give me a more reward benefit when I do a malicious thing on that. So that's why the we have to understand the attack surface, and that's how we can understand when we have attack surface knowledge. Then we can say what is the requirement of securing those APIs. So this is again one more example where this is from the open banking statistics, that which says that if you see from the August 2022, there were calls around like 1 billion something. But if you recent data, if you see, there are like 1.58 billion calls happen only in August through the APIs. So the market size is very big, the evolution is very big, which we already know. And everyone currently is using APIs, currently doing transactions through digitally. So that's the whole area. And if I only talk about India, why India I want to talk about, because India is like as a third largest country where all the fintechs boom is happening. And if this is the stats from the India side, that this global fintech particular will be increased by 1.5 trillion dollar by 2025. So recent transaction, if you say 185 billion numbers of digital transaction happen only in 1 year. So for a again same thing, like for an attacker, it's this data is very beneficial for me, because that's how as an attacker, as a defensive part also, that's how I can understand the cruciality of securing my APIs. Because this, when I open this surface to the world, that that time, as we say that when I open this surface to the world, what will happen in the end, that so many attackers will attract to this data, or so many attackers will attract to this kind of API, fintechs, and banking structure, where they want to access the data, because though they know that APIs are being used here. So how to target those APIs? So that's end with our first phase where we discussed about the attack surface. So I am sure that pretty much now everyone has an understanding that why we are discussing it, what is the need of this API.
Hey,
Uh,
Anu, I just want to make sure you're mindful of time. You got about 10 more minutes and we have some really good questions in here. So just a quick
okay.
heads up.
Oh, really? Okay, I'll go fast then. Okay, so I think the main focus was to attack, just giving the evolution of this API. Now I just want to discuss that why then we understand the attack surface. So let's shift to the why that there's a need of security. What are the rewards associated to the attackers, and what are the risks associated with the organization in the API security world? So why API security is crucial? Because and if I compare the security API security to the normal organization versus a fintech, because fintech runs in a very highly regulated environment. So apart from the security or apart from the brand, we have a compliance, we have a GDPR, PCI DSS, we have a regulated environment. If something goes bad with us, we have to pay the price for that. So basically, our license can be cancelled, some action can be taken by the officials. All those things can happen if for with a single mistake. So that's why it's very crucial, more crucial for fintech and banking handling APIs, and that we are directly handling with money and sensitive data with these API calls. We have a brand reputation. Let's say if I something goes bad, that whole brand will go down, and it's very difficult to come up again with that same reputation. Then higher tax insensitive, then complex third party integrations we have, and then securing API isn't just technical requirement for a fintech company. It's about maintaining customer trust, avoiding regulatory penalties, and ensuring long term business will go on. uh, yeah, so information flowing through APIs, if we just quickly go over there, then what kind of information basically we handle when we talk about the banking APIs. So we have a transaction data, we have a payment method information, we have user information, we have authorization data, we have a status and response code. All those things will be happen through APIs only. So if you see the survey also, there are like in PII information handling, it's 60%, account authentication data happen in 60%, and the credit payment card details 56%, device and location data 55%. This kind of data we are handling through APIs only. So that's the risk associated with API. And if we talk about the security risk associated with API, it's 40% of organizations were hit by API security incident in the last 12 months only. And 63% of those incidents involved in data breach or data loss. So if you see the graph also, there are more data breach, 55% of data breach, and there is exposure of data, in DOS attacks, unknown shadow APIs. So all these are basically a security risk when we deal with the API. This is one recent report from the Impervo also, where they, if this was specifically bot attacks, but if you see here, 44% of the account takeover attacks only happen on API, bot attacks. So that is also major risk when we deal with the API. So this kind of information is just to show that the cruciality of API, handling API, and how we should secure the API. I quickly go over the next phase, which will be talk about the challenges, attacks, and the case studies. So I know that everyone aware about the attacks and challenges, because as we are discussing about the API securing API, just to go over in that, and where I discuss the case study, I will go over the actual real scenario which I discovered, or maybe which I found in the banking and fintech sector. So the rest of it we can maybe have so many articles there. But the attacks, common attacks, we all know about that: BOLA, broken object level authorization, injection attacks, broken user authentication, mass assignment. We have access data exposure, rate limiting, all those things. And but the attacks is one part we know. The other part is the challenges what we have when we talk about securing the APIs. But when we start securing the APIs, there are so many challenges we face. For example, one is the shadow APIs. Sometimes we don't know what kind of API is already available. Companies don't know that there are shadow APIs present, and they are like lying out on the internet, and we have not secure that, but we secure the main APIs. So attackers try to do accessing those APIs. Then sometimes we don't have a proper API inventory management. We have a legacy APIs. Then we have authentication is not properly implemented on OPS. Someone implemented the authentication authorization on the front end side, but there is no back end authentication authorization happen. Then we are not following the secure SDLC cycle for API itself. Rate limiting are based on case by case or attribute based, different scenarios. Then login monitoring, something happens and we don't have the logs, we are not monitoring our APIs properly. That's the main challenge in the bigger organizations. Then versioning and lifecycle management, and the third party API vulnerabilities. This is the most crucial part, where we can always say that I know my APIs are secure, But what about what third party products we are using? Are there, when they use our APIs or they integrate our APIs, or let's say I one internal tool I'm using that using APIs and fetching my information, those kind of security checks we never implement. Usually we will never implement in third party cases. So this is the one recent attacks, as I initially mentioned, that this was the CV, which is a broken access control, which I found in the like retool tool, and the coincidence was this is a third party tool for us, and we were using this tool. But during the testing, I found there is a API slash resources call, and this API slash resources will disclosing the database password, our database password, in the response, which was very crucial for us. So this is the one example which we can highlight, that when we using a third party tool, how we make sure that their APIs are secure, or at least from our side, how we can do a vendor risk assessment, so we can understand that why these APIs are vulnerable. Even I have in-house security, but what about the third-party security? So this is a simple flow where I just hit this admin API and I got the username password. That's what hard coded in the response itself, a database username password. So this is like one thing. This is the recent from API security to IO, that there is a vulnerability exploited in blind SQL injection in Cisco. Recent. This is a recent news. So that's kind of, see, APIs are vulnerable again to this injection attacks and all, which we already know. Then we talk about the security, and then what is how to solve those problems. We know what are the issues, we know how to, what are the major concerns about APIs, then how to resolve those. So one part is we have to divide the terms. First is the essential best practices. We have to identify what others are doing, or what is the standard best practice for the APIs. For example, authentication authorization should be implemented in every layer. For example, the OAuth JWT is a standard protocol. People should use it directly as whatever the standard protocol says that. And then we have to enforce least privilege access controls. Then we have to do a proper input validation on the APIs for every parameter, every check. We have to implement that our APIs are validated for every input, whatever user is presenting, not only on the front end as well as the back end side. Then we have to present the rate limiting and throttling, which is a common thing. Then we have to think about the data encryption for each layer at rest as well as the in transit. So when we talk about this, we have to make sure that whatever, as soon as the data flow, that particular data should be encrypted properly with the API, and at the rest when we are storing the data, that time also that particular secrets and all, everything will be encrypted. Then the second phase, where we say, okay, now we have implemented everything, how to continuous monitoring improvement. So we have to do a regular security audits of our API. I know with the agile environment is very difficult to do, but at least from the some automation or using of AI, we can do it now. So conduct periodic security assessment. At least the first pass of checks should be done from some automation or the security SDLC or DevSecOps. Then we have to do a proper logging and monitoring of the API, like for WAF, for example, WAF we have. Then we have to see that what kind of patterns we are seeing in WAF or in our login monitoring system, so that we can take action item based on those API attacks. Then versioning and lifecycle management very necessary, as I mentioned, because the shadow APIs, the legacy API should be, if we are not using it, that it should be terminated. And if we are using it, then it should be treated as well as whatever the current APIs we are treating in the terms of security. The most crucial part will be the education of the developers, education of the team, that how they can start building with the security mindset. When they think about API, when they're building the API, they should be secure their APIs properly. They should maintain that, okay, my APIs are going to be vulnerable for input validation if I'm not putting this extra validation in my this fields. So this kind of things they should mention. Then we, after that, we can add more layer. Secure SDLC we can maintain. We can have a DevSecOps workflow. We can do API gateways are doing very great work if we configure it properly. And then we can use service mesh. We can always use zero trust formula. I've seen so many cases where people say, okay, our internal API doesn't need a security, or it can be open without authentication because we have edge layer services where we are doing the security stuff. But we are not thinking about the if condition, where what if someone gets inside and the whole uh, money is flowing here, internal APIs are, so he can access those services directly because there is no authentication. We have to do proper threat modeling for APIs also. Whenever there is a new development happen, whenever there is a new flow happen, we have to think about how we can do the threat modeling. we have to listen the user story, we have to write down the attacker story on top of that. And most crucial is the vendor risk management, because I showed one example. So we have to identify whatever vendor we are using, whatever open source we are using, are they secure enough for our using that infrastructure what we are providing them. And top of that also, we have to discuss about the cloud infrastructure securing. A couple of one example I want to just forgot to mention. One example was recently I was doing some like a bug bounty program, and I found a very crucial thing. Then that API, basically that API was disclosing, when I say there's a payment, not was a payment API, but what was happening there. The In the front end flow, they are restricting me to access the courses, because I have to made a payment to access the courses. But when I went to the particular APIs of this particular courses, then I was able to detect all the recordings, Zoom recordings, and the API response, so which we called excessive data exposure. And only not the Zoom recordings, but the problem was that Zoom recording have the Zoom data, attendee data, where they have phone numbers, email address, personal data, everything was there. So this kind of uh, small mistakes when I see, I think about why we are not people not considering the API in that level. That why we are only securing the front end and not talking about the API security. So excessive information disclosure is very common in APIs. People do that front end validation, front end secure, but they never do that how much my API should give the response, how much data should be going the response.